Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we take out our Dana 30 out of our JL Sport and we put a Rubicon takeoff that we put a artec truss on. We got some other cool upgrades and a couple of pitfalls we ran into, so follow along. This is Jeepingmo. Alright, so it's finally started. So before I go through and start unbolting everything, I'm going to get all the connecting arms at least loosened and get everything loose that I can, so that when this thing's jacked up, I'm not prying and pulling on it on jack stands. When we put these 3.5-inch lift dual rate springs in from Metal Cloak, we had a hard time getting them in because of the amount of droop we needed, and it was on a lift. So we decided to get a set of spring compressors to compress that spring so the thing didn't have to droop as far. And you'll see, I think it worked out pretty good for us. We'd appreciate it if you subscribe and give us some feedback and comments. Like they always say, ring the bell also. Had a little bit of trouble getting that drag link to come off. The pickle fork I had to be shortened when I took off the knuckles. That lower ball joint wouldn't take the longer pickle fork, but it eventually came off. The axle broke down pretty fast, basically just hanging off of the jack and the shocks here. And eventually I had to get the shock out of the mount, but overall it comes apart pretty easy. That's the one nice thing about a solid axle like this. Disassembly and reassembly can be pretty easy, and you see how easy those springs come out with those compressors. Makes it very easy to get them in and get them out. Don't forget the perch pads. Almost did. I had the springs in already. I had to take them back out because I forgot those. Yeah, there's one. Let's see. Hey, there's two. The Synergy tie rod and drag length, those things are both pretty beefy. So we also bought that steering stabilizer relocation kit. And later in the video, I'll go through the install process, but it's very clean. So that's something to note. When you go to put these new, like the Synergy drag link in, you have to be full turn or put it on before you put on the main tie rod. We reused the wire forms for the speed sensor and for the brake lines. Everything went along pretty well, and I'll show you here. You have to trim that back a little bit. Now if you're doing a stock Rubicon axle, you don't have to do anything at all. But if you put any kind of truss or anything on it, especially if you're in the C area there, you have to do a little bit of modification. Alright, so day 2 of this axle swap. We could have finished it all, but if you're changing from a sport front end to a Rubicon, your brake lines are different. So order longer brake lines, and order Evo makes a kit, a few others. You're going to need those, otherwise it's going to bring you to a screeching halt. If you have a truss you welded on, you're going to have to trim these little wire forms to hold everything. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So since these are dual piston, you gotta push both pistons in. You can't push them in one at a time. Otherwise, you just push the other one right back out when you push the one in. The stock stabilizers a little bit under 1/2 inch. These are 1/2 inch bolts. So it's going to grab. You'll have to drill out that stock dampener. If you're using something else, it'll go right on those 1/2 inch bolts. And when you put the new track bar bolt in it, it'll mount onto that. So we're just getting it on here. We'll come back and we'll get everything all adjusted. The control arm bolts can be a little tricky getting them in. They'll go for a little bit, but then you have to move that whole axle. And here's a little trick for that. You got to get the axle bolt in place. Just use a ratchet strap and it'll allow you to pull this axle back. On this side, we tried to use the Rubicon line, but as you can see how a Sport is bent, the Sport comes in off the bottom and the Rubicon comes in off the back, so there's no way to make this work. Alright, so we did manage to find some Evo brake line kits. Now these are for a JL Rubicon 2 to 5 inch lift. It's nice, I've already got the brackets on them, so we can get these on and get this front end buttoned up. And you use those old banjo bolts. Take off the old washers and put your new crush washers on. Make sure your line's where you want it before you tighten everything up. Alright, let's get them bled. So we're going to use a hand vacuum pump, at least to get them bled down a little bit. Before you get started, put just a little bit in the cup. When it sucks up, it's not sucking air. And make sure your hose is actually in fluid. Now these are 11 millimeter. And this kit I got from Harbor Freight, it's kind of nice. It's got this boot that'll just snap on over the bleeder. We'll open it up. You have to keep track of your oil up top too. I know I'm going to be good, but I'm going to go check up top. So I'm going to close this. Let some fluid out. Pump it back up. That hand pump is a game changer if you've never used one. Give it a try. Alright, I'm going to undo the strap I put on the wheel. I didn't want to take a chance of it spinning, messing up the clock spring or location. So basically it's just a strap with a terry cloth around it just to hold that wheel in place. I know I have to do some adjusting, but you don't want these just spinning in case you gets bumped or something. Alright, let's get that dampener going. First thing, full lock driver. And you have to fully extend the stabilizer. Then they want you to mark the center position where the bolt goes in. Then you have to repeat that with the wheels turned full lock to passenger. Then we'll mark the center position again. And we'll end up splitting that for the bolt. Mark the center. Now keep in mind it's not a shock, it's a dampener, so it's not going to spring back on you once you collapse it or pull it all the way out. Okay, so that's fully collapsed. Alright, so we're going to split the difference. So you don't want to bottom out either way. It's made by Park. It's a grip compound, and it's made for bicycles to add grip to handlebars and everything else. So Gary, thanks for that tip on that Park Tool grit compound. It's working out really nice. And maybe at some point we'll get a different dampener, but for now we're going to use a stock one. Alright, so I know this ain't very scientific here, but I'll give a rough sanity check on how we are for a line as far as being even on both sides. So off the top of the spring perch there, we're about 16 and maybe a quarter. Right on the other side, we're running pretty close to 16. Granted, now that's not scientific and tires are only so accurate. Okay, so one of the last things we got to adjust. Obviously wheel not straight. Let me show you how to straighten it up. So I always have to remember which direction to adjust this. So you have to adjust it on your drag link here. So we'll unlock the drag link. Alright, so the wheel's pretty straight now. So when you adjust that nut, when you go down with the nut, you'll turn the steering wheel with it counterclockwise. I hope you found this a little informative. I'll see you in the next video here that pops up. This is another edition of Jeepingmo. I'll see you there.